A very good morning to all of you. Don't get threatened by this sheaf of papers. I won't be too long. My dear friend Adi Godrej, Chairman of the ISP, Mr. Dean Ajit Rangnekar, and ironically, all three of us come from Mumbai, sitting here. And all the benefactors of this institute come from Delhi. The Munjals, the Mittals, Punj, and Analjit, all four good friends from Delhi. Both of us boxed between Mohali and Hyderabad. And that's the strength of India, where we bring together all parts of the country into one united whole. And I think that's the strength of the 250 odd students who comprise the Mohali campus of ISB, sharing, learning from each other, understanding different points of view, different parts of India's culture, its tradition, its heritage. And I think that's the strength which a business school environment gives to all of us students. I'm saying us students because technically when I'm enrolled at a business school as we speak, sad part is that I would have otherwise graduated just like you in 2015, since I did my first year in 2013. Sadly, haven't been able to go back to school in 14 or in 15. And I remember receiving messages from all my colleagues in the program, hey, we've graduated, and I'm sitting over here in Delhi, missing out on all the fun that I think you're going to have in the rest of the day today. But a big, big congratulations to each one of you who's graduating today. I wish the class of 2015 great success in your careers as you move forward. We have also with us Sunil Kant Munjal, Rakesh Bharti Mittal, Pramat Raj Sinha, Senior Associate Dean Milind Sohoni, Deputy Dean Pradeep Singh. I think Mohali is his baby really. So he's the one who's nurtured all of you through the year. Faculty members, staff, students, and all the proud parents that I see have come out in large numbers today. It's really a privilege to be a part of a distinguished institution like ISB. And I'm sure it must have been great fun navigating through the year, learning newer things, meeting newer people, making new friends. And I'm sure at the end of this year, as you sit back today and reflect on what your experiences are, you share with your parents the good times, the bad times, the new students of the family, the managing of family business program, the MFAB, the experiences of people who probably took a course or two in Hyderabad, because I believe both campuses run seamlessly and you have the ability to move from one campus to the other. It's a day of great joy, but also a day of great trepidation as you move into the next phase of your life, as you move into the back to business scenario, as you move back into your homes, into the environments, the challenges of working in the real world. I'm sure each one of you must be planning out, charting out a course ahead of you. And I thought I'll share with you my own experience when one moves into a new role late in life at the age of 49. When you move into a new role, you set certain benchmarks, certain plans before you. And in my own work, I've worked to a certain set of commandments, a certain set of guidelines, certain principles. And I thought I'll share with you some of those principles, how I could relate those principles to the work in a real life scenario that I'm trying to do, and allow you to consider if any of those principles work for you. Obviously, there's no one size fits all. Obviously, I don't claim to be any great professor of good management practices. But maybe since we are in any case at your last day in school, let me take this opportunity to share with you some of my own experiences. And in that sense, I remember while I was at my business program, when my first class of negotiation took place. I don't know if you have negotiation as a subject here. Deepak Malhotra was teaching us negotiation. And I remember at the end of that 1.5-hour lecture, and I shared this with the dean when I had dinner with him that night, coincidentally. I shared with him and I said, my entire course program expenditure, what I would incur when I would have completed my 3-year program, was paid off in this one lecture that I attended today. The first lecture on negotiation that Deepak Malhotra gave me, I thought paid for a 3-year program. And I remember when I was handling the information communication campaign of the Bharatiya Janata Party during the national election last year, I was able to relate to my negotiations for advertising, for media space, for a lot of the programs that we were conducting during the elections. I could relate back to what they taught me in business school. And I was remembering how ominous those words were when I told Dean Noria that the entire expenditure of a 3-year program got paid off in that one lecture. And I won't be surprised as you get into your real life situation and you recall each one of those classic case studies that you may have done, or the examples or the principles that you went through, being almost paying back many times over in the activities that you will come forward to do. And in that sense, I'll just share with you some of my own experiences being in government for 10 months now, soon 11 months, and how these 10 months and these 10 principles relate to probably real life experiences that you will get into starting tomorrow. The first lesson I learnt was that we'll have to work in partnership with all stakeholders. You clearly can't be the instrument of change alone. And unless you take everybody along with you, you're not going to be successful. I remember the African proverb, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. And in that sense, when I got the ministries of power, coal and new and renewable energy to meet together, and that was my first week in office, where I kept a program called Samvad, Sampark and Samanvay. You get to know each other, you communicate with each other, and you relate to each other. And in that program I found it was the first time in 67 years that 3 ministries of the government had actually met each other. And all 3 related to the power sector in some form or the other. They had not even met each other. And 300 of those people got together, engaged with each other. I had Chetan Bhagat come in to talk about, to motivate them to think of their work as public service. And I remember the enthusiasm at the end of that program, where the 3 ministries decided that now we'll work together. And it's been a similar experience all through the 10 months, that wherever we had multi-stakeholder consultations, we engaged with people. The coal strike was a clear example, where everybody talked of doom and gloom, what could happen if the strike went on. You remember the famous coal strike in England? The United Kingdom had almost come to a standstill at that infamous coal strike. But when we sat with the workmen, engaged in a dialogue, and it was a probably 8 or 9 hour dialogue in the ministry, and we could relate to each other's problems and we could relate to each other's concerns. And you won't believe it, out of those 8 hours, maybe 1.5 or 2 hours was spent in sorting out the coal strike, and 6 hours was spent learning from the workmen leaders how we could achieve the 1 billion target that we had for Coal India Limited, which is doubling the coal production, something which took nearly 20 years to achieve. We want to do in the next 4 years. But more ideas came from them than could ever have come to my mind or the mind of the chairman or the senior executives. But when we think of it together as a shared responsibility, we can achieve much more. And partnerships will always go a longer way than individual action. The second lesson that I learned in the last few days, and which has become my commandment, is that leadership will always have to be decisive. A weak leadership cannot get you anywhere. In your own work, you'll have to take the bull by the horns, you'll have to take decisions. In government, it's not empowered group of ministers, committees and commissions that help government perform any better. They can at best be a shield, a Raksha Kavach, as they say, something to protect you from whatever decision you're taking. And it's a sad part of governance that people don't have the ability to take bold decisions. I remember in one decision where I had substantially reduced e-auctions that Coal India Limited used to do, which was very profitable for the company. There's a lot of hue and cry, and people talked about the falling performance of Coal India and the profitability of Coal India falling. And at that point I shared this concern with Prime Minister Modi, that the profitability of Coal India is getting affected because of this decision, but it's in wider national interest that we need to reduce e-auction and provide more coal to the power plants so that people can get power and affordable power. And I remember his anguish when he turned to the officials and he said, and I'd like to say it in Hindi because the essence of that will come clearer. He said, कब तक इस देश में लोग अपनी कंपनी या कॉर्पोरेशन के या अपने डिपार्टमेंट के प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस अकाउंट को देखते रहेंगे? कभी किसी ने इस देश के प्रॉफिट एंड लॉस अकाउंट को देखा है क्या? Till when will we keep assessing the profit and loss account of one company? Isn't it time we looked at the profit and loss of the country as a whole? And to my mind, that is what decisive leadership is all about. Can we think at a bigger scale? Can the leadership be more decisive? Take some decisions which may seem inconvenient, but are in the wider public interest, wider interests of the nation. And in that sense, leadership will define your own success, your own ability to perform. And I would urge each one of you to be willing to take strong decisions. You may make some mistakes. Be willing to accept those mistakes, be willing to learn from those mistakes, but take decisions. The third big lesson that I learned was our actions have to be more outcome oriented. They can't be outlay oriented. It's not important how much money government spends on education, on health, or any of the other activities. It's what the outcome is going to be. What are we going to achieve out of that? Benjamin Franklin had once commented, those who fail to plan to fail. We'll have to plan for what we are going to achieve out of every action that we do. And when we set up the target of creating 175 gigawatts of renewable energy, initially it sounded quite unbelievable. It was probably a little top-down driven approach. But once that was set in our minds, once we took that decision, then we worked on a bottom-up approach to make sure that we achieve the outcome. It can't be that we just throw in a figure, throw in a number, and say that we are going to spend so much money to achieve that, but fail to plan how we are going to achieve it, and fail to understand that what is the impact of that end objective on whatever work we are doing or on the country as a whole. Unfortunately, over the years, governments have focused more on outcomes, on outlays. Financial audits have been done, but efficacy audits, outcome audit has remained more on paper than on actually actionable ideas. I know that we come out with an outcome budget for every ministry in the government. But I suspect, and I won't be surprised if anybody in this whole room has never read an outcome budget of any ministry. Maybe at best the outcome budget given at the time of the budget, some of us may read on 28th of February. But clearly, outcome budgets, if assessed properly, if taken seriously, will also make us more accountable, will also make us more responsible in whatever actions we do in government. And I think if each one of you imbibes in yourself the ability to think of outcomes rather than outlays, I'm sure you'll be able to do far more successful work going forward. A very important lesson I learned was that instead of focusing on individual issues, if I was to look at doing a root cause analysis of all my actions, I'm able to perform much better. And I'll give you the outcome of doing a root cause analysis. When I joined government, at an average, I would get about 100 files a day between the three ministries, 100 files a day. As I went into each issue and realized the repetitiveness of government's decision making and tried to focus on policy-driven approach, understanding what is the root cause of the reason for all these files to come to me, started delegating much more, empowering people to take decisions at lower levels, reducing the levels of decision making. Today, I'm happy to tell you, I barely get 5 or 6 files a day. That's the amount of reduction that was possible by reducing my own involvement in taking decisions and ensuring that we become a more policy-driven. So as each issue got flagged off, we looked at how we can make it more policy-driven, transparent, let the people know what we are trying to achieve, what we want them to do, and bring down the number of cases that get escalated to the top. So I doubt I might have ever filed even 1 or 2 files which are of an individual case or an individual company. All that has been flagged off to me now is always a policy which possibly may impact 10, possibly 100, possibly more people. But never an individual case has come up to me for clearance or approval. Simple example that I would like to share with you is on the power sector. Now, the country's problem is not about the amount of power generation or the ability to generate power. In many cases, we have surplus power in large parts of the country. But the two real root causes of India's agony are the availability of fuel, coal and gas, and the ability to transmit that power all through the country. So today the northeast and southern India are deprived of power, and 280 million people in India to this day don't have an electricity connection in their home. They are denied of a basic thing like power. I know my father used to study under street lights, not very far from Mohali, by the way, a place called Ambala Kant. It's probably an hour and a quarter away from Mohali. But that was in the 40s. We are now 80 years since then, 75 years since then. I'm sure none of us want the next generation to have a single child deprived of a basic amenity like power, electricity in their home. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the mission we've set out to do, towards which we are using all of these principles to achieve results, to get power for all by 2019, not merely as a slogan, but by actionable agenda, by true action on the ground and deliverables. Another rule that we've set for ourselves is the rule of transparency, the rule of law. How do we make sure that every action is in public domain, is available for people to scrutinize, to audit, and is by law? I mean, the coal auctions can be the best and most obvious example, where instead of discretion, instead of ability of a politician or a bureaucrat to favor a few, We have brought it into public domain, a completely transparent process, something which is fair and equitable for everybody. And if each one of us, and fortunately we have illustrious leaders from business who have over the years been icons of working through the rule of law. I mean, an R.D. Godrej or a Munjal or a Mittal are known for their outstanding track record to follow the rule of law, to go straight. And that will truly be the hallmark of success, that each one of you will benefit if you stand by and maintain the highest standards of accountability, the highest standards of adherence to the rule of law. Shortcuts are never going to benefit in your work. Shortcuts can only take you so far. It's always the long haul. It's always the ability to not maneuver the system illegally, but maneuver the system legally, transparently, that will hold you in good stead. And that has been the hallmark of, if you ask me, Prime Minister Modi's own governance in Gujarat for 12 years as Chief Minister. And that is the defining feature of this government he's leading at the center, which is proud to announce has been scam-free and is working towards delivering the welfare to the people in a most transparent and honest manner. The sixth lesson was prioritization of issues. The idea is not to just work like a, on a blind alley. One will have to decide what is the priority before the nation. Tony Blair had once said, it's not an arrogant government that chooses priorities. It's an irresponsible government that fails to choose its priorities. And in that sense, Prime Minister Modi also understands that power will be a priority, because a lot revolves around the family life, a lot revolves around power being available to people in their homes. Industrialization grows, job creation grows, the economic activity grows. And in that sense, if each one of us in our lives prioritizes what we are going to do, what we're going to focus on. And I remember energy efficiency to me is a big priority item, because there I not only save 1 kilowatt of energy for every unit saved, I'm actually saving maybe 1.25 unit of electricity, or on a mathematical principle 1.33 times every unit of energy that I save, given that India has about 25% average AT&C losses even today. So really for every unit saved, I'm saving 1.33 units. And the impact of that on the environment, the carbon footprint, all of that it's a multiplier effect. So if I prioritize my efforts so that in 2.5 years from now, I can bring down the energy wastage by 10%, I'm looking at powering those 280 million homes out of this energy saved. So clearly prioritizing issues is one way each one of you can achieve better results, become more cost conscious, and the cost benefit of your actions will be the largest if you prioritize your actions. The next lesson that I've worked on is time-bound execution and faster dispute resolution. Unfortunately, in India over the years, we've just allowed disputes to fester and continue. It'll be a great day if we can bring down disputes in the law courts, we can start engaging with people, talking to people, and sorting out issues bilaterally, rather than letting them linger on for years and years. Very often it's a choice between the devil and deep sea, and that's when faster decision making can make a lot of difference. I remember I was confronted with the problem of anti-dumping duty being imposed on the solar industry when I joined office. An anti-dumping duty, if not imposed, would have given a message that India does not care for domestic manufacturers. An anti-dumping duty, if imposed, would have killed the solar mission, would have killed any efforts to bring renewable energy to India. Because in the short run, we wouldn't have been able to scale up, given that Indian manufacturing had very limited ability. The issue was almost a done deal. 22nd of May, 4 days before we were sworn into government, the Commerce Ministry had passed an order that anti-dumping duty should be imposed on several countries. One day it just struck me that why not call the manufacturers and try and have a dialogue. We had a 6 or 7 hour dialogue one evening with all the major manufacturers of solar equipment. And at the end of the dialogue, we both sides realized what are each other's problems. We were able to draw up an actionable plan, which could be a win-win for both the solar manufacturers, for the government, and for India as a whole. And it took barely 1 week to resolve that issue. And for the first time, certainly in India, possibly anywhere in the world, you saw a group of persons who were manufacturers of a particular set of equipment, the solar manufacturers, withdrawing an anti-dumping solar application despite having got a favorable order from the Ministry of Commerce. It was the first time somebody withdrew that and realized that there would actually be a sufferer if that anti-dumping duty was imposed. So clearly, if one was to look at time-bound dispute resolution, one can really get far more done than just going to the law courts. The 8th lesson was, of course, something you're all very familiar with, is the technology focus. And the amount of savings we are getting because of a technology focus, because of the Digital India program, is humongous. In my own efforts to bring down cost of LED, the LED bulbs that we are procuring in government, we've used technology in a big way, used the reverse bidding process, brought out more tighter standards and had more checks through technology intervention. And you won't believe it, the cost of procuring an LED bulb, which was 310 rupees as recently as February 2014, government used to procure bulbs at 310, has come down on 22nd March in the last e-bidding process to 81 rupees 93 paisa. I don't know what is the amount of corruption that was eliminated in the process. Some part of it was due to economies of scale. Some part of it was due to some innovative financing models. A lot of it was due to the technology platform and the transparency that we brought in. But technology has the power to impact government, businesses, and of course each one's lives. When we talk of smart grids, smart cities, that's exactly what we are looking at. Of course, innovative financing is another thing which governments need to imbibe in their own working. I'm looking at some new financing models which will bring down renewable energy costs significantly. And I'm hoping that very soon you'll see renewable energy in large measure being almost at grid parity with coal. And I believe that will be the day India will be able to truly scale up renewable energy to world standards, maybe become the world's largest producer of renewable energy, and innovative financing models can really help. And I'm sure with the kind of training that you have got in your business school, each one of you can become innovators of new financing models in your own businesses, in your own work. Last lesson is on accountability and close monitoring. This is a lesson which Prime Minister Modi actually gave me. I'd gone there to report on certain aspects of the coal auction, and he suddenly asked me, how many people have registered in Delhi for the LED bulbs program which I launched on 5th January. This was about a month after that, and I was completely foxed. I didn't have any clue how many people had registered. And I said, I'll check and get back to you. And he said, Piyush, काम ऐसे नहीं होता है. जब तक आप उसको क्लोजली मॉनिटर नहीं करोगे, तब तक आप उसकी अकाउंटेबिलिटी नहीं सेट कर पाओगे. You'll have to monitor the people's work on a real-time basis. And he gave me the example of Jan Dhan Yojana. I'm sure you've heard about that. A country where nearly 100 million homes did not have a connect with the financial inclusion program. They were completely unbanked. Again, 67 years after independence. When Prime Minister Modi took it up on mission mode, and actually got 125 million homes connected to the financial architecture of the country in under 5 months. It didn't happen on its own. And when he shared with me that he used to have a morning meeting every day to review the progress of that program, that's how in 5 months he was able to reach nearly 99% of the homes all across India, to at least bring them into the financial architecture, and then look at how we can involve the banking system to truly reach the benefits to the people, to give them the power of having a bank account, the power of banking, the power of being in an integrated system, the financial system of the country. And actually since then I've become much more conscious in my follow-up of the nearly 263 items that I have on my dashboard, which I have to follow up regularly. And coal production being a critical item, I actually get an SMS every morning giving the previous day's coal production. And it's only because of these interventions that India has been able to achieve the highest increase in the generating capacity added in the last year. 22,000 megawatt installed capacity added last year, the highest in the history of India. 22,700 circuit kilometers of transmission lines added in the last 12 months, again the highest in the history of India. Energy shortage, which is a way to measure what is the outages, what are the problems people are facing, down to 3.6% last year, the lowest in the history of India. The coal production, as a nation we've increased coal production by 8.3%, the highest in the last 23 years since liberalization. Coal India itself has added 32 million tons of coal in the last 10 months, growth of production, which took them 4 years between 2010 to 14 to do. They added 30 million tons in 4 years, but were able to do 32 million in 10 months. It's like nothing has changed. Everything is the same. The people are the same. The workers are the same. The technology as yet is the same. We still have to have new technology interventions. We still have to have many, many more things to be done there. But it's the same people empowered with all these 10 principles, closely monitored and made accountable. And that's the kind of results one can get. So truly, I think you are all privileged. You are privileged to have the education of a wonderful institution like ISB. Do something that leaves a lasting impact in whatever work you may want to do. As you leave the portals of this esteemed institution, go back into society. As Dean Rangnekar also mentioned, go back into society with all these learnings, with all that the last 12 months has taught you. Go back into society in whatever vocation you may take. And on my side, I would urge as many of you as can afford it, as are willing to do, give some portion of your life also back to society. It could be in public service, it could be in national service, it could be in government, it could be in an NGO right outside your home. It could be a simple thing like a building society or a resident welfare association. You can impact society, you can impact people's life. You can make a difference to this country in a multitude of ways. But please do get engaged in some form or the other in nation building. That will give you more satisfaction than any amount of the dollars that you may earn, than any amount of the riches or luxuries that you may get. But believe me, the satisfaction that you get, even if it's in such a small thing as trying to keep your neighborhood clean, your workplace clean, being a part of the Swachh Bharat campaign, being a part of the literacy campaign, being a part of the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign. If you could even teach one young girl, maybe a maid's daughter, maybe a driver's daughter, somebody, the immense satisfaction that you will get will far outweigh any amount of work, any amount of income that you may get, any amount of profitability that Adi's company or Sunil's company may get out of your work, the greatest satisfaction will come out of public service. I would just like to end by requesting Dean Rangnekar to consider if it's possible to set up an innovation lab, and I'm happy to get it funded from the power sector of the government. If the institute can consider setting up an innovation lab, possibly initially it could focus on energy conservation, on sustainability, on any subject of your choice, on public governance, whatever all of you decide. But I would look forward to coming back to ISB one of these days to see the good work beyond your call of duty you are doing to innovate and give back to the country some of the expertise. You mentioned about your program on the agricultural research. If you can formalize that into a structured study program also. If you want to have some of your students come and intern in government and maybe understand what's happening within government, we'd be happy to draw up such programs. But clearly a great privilege for me to be amongst all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, my best wishes to all of you in your career ahead and a hearty congratulations. Thank you.